Hi, everyone. Really looking forward to getting started. Thanks to everyone who'll join us. Thanks for everyone who started joining. We'll be taking the next 5 minutes to wait as people join, and then we'll be getting started. Hi, everyone. If you're just joining in, we'll be taking the next few minutes to wait as people join. Thanks to everyone who's joining. Really looking forward to the day and seeing all of our amazing community members and speakers share their stories with you and with us. So really looking forward to it. We'll take the next few minutes just to wait until people join in. And today, what we'll be doing is first of all, I'm going to be starting by stepping back and just talking a bit about our why. Appreciate some of you are existing community members, and some may be new and maybe looking at Morta, generally speaking. But I think one of the things that's most important is just to step back and reflect on what we're trying to achieve here as a collective community. So I'll be talking through information as Mortar, which is in many ways our metaphor for what needs to happen for the industry. I'll will then be joined by the team from SES Engineering Services that are part of Waits Group, and they're going to be talking about how they've been delivering digital across the company, and they're going to be talking a lot about governance and what they're doing with Morta there. We're then going to be joined by Thibaut and Ian from Briggs Murphy joint venture and Arab McDonald joint venture, who are going to be talking us through a collaborative approach on major infrastructure delivery and what that looks like and how they've been using the platform. We're then going to have 3 use case spotlights. So we'll have the first one being on building safety and reflections on the Building Safety Act and the role of tools in supporting compliance. And we'll be joined by Alan Binns from Project Safety for that. We're then going to have a talk by Jan from Stantec, who's going to be sharing more about what he's been doing in terms of resource planning and tracking on the platform and how they've been approaching that. We'll then have a session focused on information planning and tracking, which will be by Kasia Rostic from King Group, and she'll be sharing her reflections there and how she's been using the platform. And then finally, we'll have the team from Sir Robert McAlpine, Mark and Josh, who will be talking through how they've scaled information management across a tier one contractor and the work that they've been doing there. And at the end, many of you will know we had a hackathon this year. So we'll be announcing the hackathon winners. We'll be talking through some of the submissions that we had, and we'll be reflecting on that as well. So thank you for everyone who's joined us so far. Really nice to see many of you already dropping in messages. Please do say hello. Please do interact with each other. One of the things that we really want here is for this to be a community where we all lean in on each other and we all support each other and we all get inspiration from each other. So thanks to everyone who's joining, and really looking forward to seeing how the day goes. We'll just give it another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Amazing. So, hi everyone. Again, really good to be with you today. Thanks for everyone who's joined in so far. My name is Mo. I'm one of the co founders of the company, and I'm really looking forward to hosting the session today and to welcoming many of our community members, both who are speaking as well as many of you who are joining us online. And we're really, so today we're mainly gathered for our 7th year anniversary. And it's literally been 7 years since we incorporated. We incorporated on the 14th of November 2028. Sorry, I've just gone forward in time. 2018. So it's been 7 years, and it's been quite the journey. We've been lucky to have many of you here support us throughout, and the community has been continuously growing over the last few years. And really, we like having this day on an annual basis to just reflect on where we are and where we've reached and what we've done as a collective community together, because ultimately we think that's what it's all about. And we really need to be working as a collective in order to respond to the industry's biggest problems. So this is celebrating. So this day for us is about celebrating the community as much as it's celebrating our journey as a company. So thanks for every single one of you who's been with us on this journey so far. Now, what we'll be doing today, as I mentioned, is we'll have a series of talks with a few of our community members, and I'll be introducing them shortly. But first, you'll be hearing a bit from me around what we're trying to achieve as a company. Appreciate you. Some may have heard variations of this over time, but I think it's always important to just have a feel for what we think we're doing for you, and why we think we exist, because ultimately that's what guides everything that we do. So with that in mind, I'm going to be giving a talk. I recent as a earlier this year, I realized that we've called ourselves Morta as a company, and not many people know why. And in many ways, it's because we took inspiration from the word mortar, and we think that information should be treated as mortar within the industry. One of the really popular metaphors is data is the new oil, and but we think a lot of the things that go wrong within the industry are because it's siloed and disconnected. And we thought that Mortar has bound the industry together in many ways so far. And we think information can do the same for the industry, and therefore help us respond to some of the biggest problems. Now, what's the state of the industry, generally speaking, and like what are some of the big challenges that we face within the industry? So fundamentally, many of us here are in the information management discipline, and we see a range of information challenges. So the first is we have when we think about it, broadly speaking, information chaos is costing projects millions, and then in turn costing the industry very, very large sums of money. And that breaks down to three core reasons. The first is fragmentation of data. The second is reporting and evidencing. And the third is continuous improvement. And we'll be breaking each of these down shortly. So first, let's talk through fragmentation of data. We think that's largely at the heart of the problem. So effectively, when we look at any project today, we have systems that exist for a range of things. That could be document management systems and common data environments. It could be BIM models. It could be ERPs. It could be field systems. It could be coordination systems, CRMs. The list goes on. Every one of these systems and databases exists in a silo on its own. We have spreadsheets in the middle, and that exist for tracking and for planning. And fundamentally, what we end up doing is pulling in information from each of these systems and manually adding them into these spreadsheets. These spreadsheets also often have to interface with what's in Word documents. So things like BIM execution plans, EIRs, compliance statements, health and safety files, O&M manuals, and so on and so forth. And then ultimately, we want to feed this information into some kind of dashboard, usually in Power BI. But that ends up being quite a manual process because all of this information is disconnected and is inconsistent. And always when we think of like the fact that it's manual, there are two impacts there. First, we're hearing from many of our community members it takes 20 to 40% of their time and just reporting and creating these reports and wrangling data, which is time that can be used for higher value adding tasks. The more important challenge, in my opinion, is a lack of visibility. It's very difficult for people to have an understanding on where a project is at or where a process is at any given point in time, which then means we're sitting on a lot of risk. Now, if we take that a step further, ultimately, when we're thinking of all of this doesn't have to happen on one level and one level only. It needs to happen on many different levels. We have supply chain and data that we're collecting from the supply chain. That data has to roll up into projects. The projects then have to roll up into portfolios, which can be regions, for example, and then ultimately that results in organization level reporting. And on every one of these levels, there are also various things that we need to be monitoring for compliance against. Within the sustainability world, you have things that range from BREEAM and LEED and the likes thereof. We'll always have standards that we have to comply to from BSI and ISO. We have the regulatory requirements that we have to follow. We have clients that we have to report to. So ultimately, reporting and evidencing has to happen in multiple levels. And what we often see is that there is a lot of duplication in terms of the requirements across the board, which then means we're adding more and more overhead in any of these tasks and more risk in terms of inconsistency across the board. Now, to take that a step further, as a result of the status quo, it's often the case that intervention opportunities are missed. So we have things like value engineering, for example, that are often very difficult to unlock because of the fact that the data is disconnected. We have things like material that we're using at scale as main contractors that is very difficult to aggregate and gain an understanding of all of the material needs across projects, which then helps us optimize the use of material at scale, for instance. There's poor visibility and learning for future planning. So it's very difficult to take the lessons learned from previous jobs, take that into my new jobs in order for me to ensure that I'm using up-to-date information and I'm using these lessons learned in order to plan better. Equally, it's the same thing when it comes to assessing things like supply chain performance, for example, and seeing how different teams are delivering in order to use that when forming teams in the future. But I think most of all, and most importantly, we often see in the industry people talk about different challenges as if they were a silo. So we'll have people talk about things like productivity, we'll have people talk about building safety, handover, carbon, resource use. Two that are really subtle and like important are accountability and trust. But each of these are in many ways seen as a separate challenge. But in many ways, what brings all of these together is information chaos. I personally, and I think many of you as our community members share the sentiment with me that information chaos is really the root cause of many of these challenges. If nothing else, it makes it much, much harder for us to have the visibility on these challenges in order for us to then be able to course correct and make the interventions that we need. So then the question becomes, where do we want to go? What should we be trying to do as an industry in order to respond to these challenges and in order to course correct? What's our vision in many ways for all of this? And I think there have been different interpretations of what I'm about to lay out. Um, but fundamentally, for me, it comes down again to this concept of using information as mortar, connecting the dots between each other and connecting the dots between the different silos that exist. And that's why we think it's a powerful metaphor. So what does that look like? First, we have people and teams that are responsible for different functions and that need to know different things. That could be a design manager who needs to know the design progress and whether the design complies with building regulatory requirements. That could be a commercial manager who needs to understand how the project is performing and whether it's on budget. It could be someone in procurement who may want to understand where the material is at or how supply chain is performing, for instance. It could be someone in sustainability who wants to understand what is the forecasted carbon footprint or what is the actual carbon footprint and whether we have all of the evidence that we need. And it could be someone in information management who needs to understand whether we have the information, like complete information, and whether it's fit for purpose, and so on and so forth. Now, to get answers to these questions, ideally what we move towards is a foundation where we've connected up the key different aspects of a project. So we have first things that govern a project. First, we have requirements and quality. Second, we have cost. Third, we have carbon. And fourth, we have time. Then we have the scope the scope of work. That could be design, that could be construction, or it could be operations if I'm an asset owner. We then have resources that are required to deliver said scope. So that's our supply chain, our workforce, and our material and assets. And then finally, we have interface areas: information management, risk and health and safety, and change management. Ideally, all of these different aspects that are usually managed by different teams and have different data sources can connect with each other and can speak with each other and can share data between each other. But not only should they share data as a common foundation that we would have, like as a single source of truth, they should also then be able to connect with different sources of truth. So we have things in projects like project schedules that can come out of systems like P6 or ASTA projects. We have document management systems and CDEs. We have ERPs, we have CRMs, potentially field systems and data sources, and then even things like IoT, for example, as data sources. Ideally, all of these trackers that we have to govern our project are pulling out data from these different systems in a consistent manner at the same time, so that we're all singing of the same hymn sheet, if you will, and we're all speaking the same language within the project, and we all know exactly where things are at any given point in time. What we should then be able to do is we should be able to derive insight from this data. That insight can be generated in different ways and depending on what it is that I'm looking at. Sometimes I may want something like a Power BI dashboard, and I may want dashboards because that's the way to visualize that information. Sometimes I may want to visualize it in a BIM model and in a 3D setting effectively. Sometimes I may want to see it in something like geographic information systems because I'm an asset owner that's doing work in infrastructure, for instance. And then increasingly, I may want to derive data. I may want to gather my insight using AI, for instance. So someone may be using something like Copilot or Claude or a ChatGPT or the range of any of these, and they will want to interrogate that data and derive insight from that. But ultimately, for that to happen, there has to be a source of truth that the information can be retrieved from. Now, I think for us, like one of the things that we've been increasingly thinking about, and we think is really promising for the industry, is this idea of human agent collaboration. So fundamentally, we think treating information as mortar and connecting the dots between the different functions is a foundation for us to be able to collaborate with agents in the future. And you can see that the diagram at the bottom changes because increasingly what we think will happen is people will do certain tasks, agents will do certain tasks, people will then do other tasks, agents will do other tasks, and so on and so forth. And we think that's really the future of the industry, and that's what we'll see happening more and more. But in order to get there, we need to have a foundation where we've connected the data together and we've allowed for these different data sets to speak with each other. When we start thinking of things like AI agents and what that looks like, there is a very, very wide range of these. Like we think over time, what we'll see is thousands of agents within projects, just like we see thousands of specialists who get involved at different levels. And they can perform a very wide range of tasks. There could be an agent that's specifically focused on automated classification, for example. There could be things focused on early detection of delivery and commercial risk, data enrichment, better planning based on granular data, and so on and so forth. We'll be hearing later on today examples of some of these that the different teams have built as part of the hackathon that we had. Now, we've painted the vision, what we're collectively trying to get to. The question becomes, how do we get there? And again, I think many of you here are the converted, but I think it breaks down into 5 different things, and I'm referring to them as the 5 bricks of mortar. So first, we have standards, and that's things like 19650. Second, we have information models. Third, we have classification systems. Fourth, we have software. And fifth, we have people who need to have the appropriate the skills in order to deliver on all of this. First, let's start with 19650. 19650 helps us create a consistent process for managing information. We start with things like requirements, we move into planning, we then move into information production, we move into review and assurance, and then we move into using data. Then information models and schemas can actually help us when it comes to collaboration and visibility at the end. So things like requirements ideally should map into things like IDS, planning and production should map to things like IFC, review and assurance should map to things like BACF, and so on and so forth, and any of the other models that may exist. What that in turn really helps us do is have consistent data sets that we're collecting that can then feed into the different insights mechanisms that we were talking about, whether it's a dashboard, whether it's GIS, whether it's a BIM model, or whether it's AI. And then classification systems ensure that we have consistent data and we're describing things consistently so that we can do a range of things. It could be things like comparing across projects. It could be driving value engineering, identifying hotspots, improving planning and benchmarking, automating reporting, or powering AI and analytics. But it's really, really core for us to be describing things consistently in order for us to be able to make comparisons across projects, which is then really what lends itself for us being able to make the improvements that we need and drive better outcomes fundamentally. And then this is the bit where I go, software is really important, right? So typically when someone is talking about these things, they'll go, you should be cutting edge, drive efficiency, future-proof, transform your business. And I think a lot of these types of things are important. But fundamentally, ultimately, from our perspective, and going back to that initial diagram and the vision, today we have a lot of unstructured information. And in order for us to deliver on this vision, what we need to do is we need to move to structured data that can connect with each other and that's interoperable and that can move between different systems. And as a result, we can then reuse it and derive insight from this data in various ways. Now, when I always say I'm not the first or the last person that will say Excel and Word, for example, have their challenges. But usually you'll see two different approaches within the sector. And we think both aren't delivering the industry's needs. The first is off the shelf solutions, and then the second is no code or low code platforms. Off the shelf solutions are the typical solutions you'd see that would say, I focus on handover or cost or BIM execution plans and the likes thereof. They'll usually aim to have best practice for workflows. They'll typically be rigid and siloed. There's a learning curve for every new tool. And then there is increasing tool overload. So we're hearing from many of the main contractors who use Morta. They have around 200 solutions within their tech stack. We're hearing from some of the consultancies that we work with that they have in the order of 2,000 solutions within their tech stack. And that's fundamentally because these solutions can't be configured to meet their needs, and they end up needing to buy a new solution every single time. Now, the other option is no-code or low-code platforms, and there's a very wide range there. It ranges from things like Monday.com to Airtable, Coda, Smartsheets, Notion, and at the very top end, you have the likes of Palantir. Now, usually these are flexible as solutions, and that's their strength point. The challenge with most of these, though, is they don't focus on the sector. They're not focusing on that vision that I was describing earlier, which then means you're left to figure all of these things out from scratch on your own. It ends up taking a lot of time and a lot of money to get them working for the industry. You need to build out the integrations that you need. You need to build out the templates that you need. And they're not built for project-based collaboration. Ultimately, and there is a lot more friction in actually delivering on that vision that I was describing earlier, and you're figuring that in many ways on your own. And that's where we come in. So we aim to provide a connected platform built for the industry to plan, track, document, and report on project delivery. At its core, we're replacing Word and Excel files with web-based hubs that are just as flexible as the horizontal no-code solutions I was describing earlier. But because we focus on the industry, we come with a few things that are really, really important to ensuring that we deliver on that vision that I was describing earlier. First, we have templates that are aligned with industry standards and that can then be easily configured to meet your needs. Second, we integrate with popular software and data models that are used by the industry. Third, we support collaboration with third parties because that's very important in project-based settings where you'll have 50 different supply chain members who need to get together to deliver a project. Increasingly, we're focusing on automation, be it with AI agents or with rule-based automation. And then finally, one of the key things that we've especially been investing in this year is supporting scale and governance. When I say scale and governance, what do I mean? I'm talking about things like enterprise-grade security. We know many of you work on sensitive jobs, for example, and you require things like ISO 27001 and Cyber Essentials Plus, which is why we gained these certifications earlier this year. We provide options when it comes to data residency. We have SSO enforcement options. We have role-based access control. We have audit trails. All of which are things that are very, very important when a system like ours is being used in the types of projects that it's being used in. As you'll be hearing about later. Now, this approach is generally speaking being adopted in many different sectors. We're at least in 8 countries to date. We're being used on everything from education to healthcare to entertainment to infrastructure to data centers to ports to residential blocks and so on and so forth. And We're trusted by a network of global industry leaders. So you'll be hearing from many of them, of course, today. But we're working with owners, we're working with consultancies, we're working with supply chain members, general contractors, design firms, and communities of practice. I think for me, the slide is very important for multiple reasons. Ultimately, when we're thinking of competition, we're thinking of the horizontal players that I was describing earlier. Their roadmap gets distracted by all kinds of needs that they're getting from all kinds of industries, which means they're not going deep into the industry's needs. Whereas with us, every single person who works and uses Morta is thinking about one thing and one thing only, which is the built environment in the construction industry. And in turn, that then reflects on our product roadmap, because year on year, you continuously see improvements that make it easier and easier for you to implement that vision that I was describing earlier. Now, with that in mind, what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to give a quick overview of some of the work that we've been doing on the platform. Now, generally speaking, when you get on the platform, one of the key things that we've invested in the last year is developing our templates. So currently, we're in our community templates home hub, and you can see here to the left, there's a very wide list of templates that can be used in order to respond to the various challenges that you may have. But the very first one that we have is a project dashboard. And this has actually been one of the biggest development areas that we've had this year. We heard feedback from many of you that yes, you want to use Power BI on an organizational level, and and we support that, of course, as you'll be hearing from many of the speakers later. But we also heard that there is a need for something that is as accessible as Excel for for the person who would have used Excel in the past, right? So what we've done is we've invested in our charting capabilities as a company. And here you can see a sample dashboard that has a range of things. And I think like two that I just want to point out that I think are quite relatively unique, at least. S-curves is the first. S-curves is obviously highly needed within the industry. There's a lot of focus on planned versus actual. And I mean, when you hear all of our community members, planned versus actual is at the heart of everything that we do. I think we're the only no-code platform that has S-curves right now. And ultimately, I just see that as one example of our focus on the industry. The second one that there's obviously a range of others, but we've also started adding and building Gantt charts, because that's another area we've seen that many of you have been asking us to work on. What you can then see is in a project dashboard, here we've just brought together a range of trackers. That could be something like my information delivery plan, for example. It could be something like progress tracking, which is where I would be bringing in, for example, activities from a P6 schedule. It could be something like RFI tracking, which I would also want to be bring in. It could be my risk trackers. It could be my change and variations orders. And it could be, for example, commissioning and inspections. Though we've seen many companies have Excel files for monthly reports, and ultimately, this is our version of what a monthly report or a weekly report starts looking like on the platform. But the key thing is no one would have to go and fill these things in, because ultimately all of this data I have been, just give me a second. Awesome. So all of this data, generally speaking, feeds from various trackers and various templates that exist. So, for example, one of the most popular ones is information delivery planning and tracking, and you'll be hearing from several of the talks today about how that's being used. You can see here, this is what an MIDP, for instance, looks like. You can see that I can then drill down on that, and then I can take any of this and I can see all of the different deliverables that I would have within the different disciplines. What I would then have is this data coming out of what a CDE, for example, like Viewpoint, or like ACC, or like Aconex, or any of those. And I'll be showing you that in 1 second. What I can then see is this data comes in to dashboards here that are specifically for the information delivery planning use case, and I can then work with that. Now, we can then see a very wide range of other use cases, right? So I can see, for instance, something like Kobe checkers, and this is another example of reports that that demonstrates the completeness of the data and the compliance and so on and so forth. And I can get this by feeding in data, for example, from many different, like the Excel-based workbooks, or data that's collected directly on the platform here. And that then results in validations and so on and so forth. There are then many other use cases that can be covered. I'm not going to go into them now. You'll be hearing about all kinds of use cases that the community is building shortly. The last thing that I just wanted to touch on is from a core platform perspective is integrations. So I'm just gonna say here, I'm gonna create a new hub. I'm gonna call it Community Day. Once I've done this, you can see usually I start from blank, and then I can load templates if I want. But one of the most popular features that we have is the ability to import data from various data sources. And this is another area where you'll see over the last year, the library of systems that we pull from has only increased. So from ACC, for instance, we're pulling in data from checklists, documents, issues, reviews, and users. From Aconex, we're pulling in data from documents, mails, and workflows. From A-Site, we're pulling in documents and forms. From Viewpoint, we're pulling in documents and RFIs. From Revisto, issues and sheets. And from Procore, we're pulling in documents. This library has continued to grow off the back of the feedback that we've been receiving from the community, just like the library of templates has grown off the feedback that we've received from the community. Our goal is to make this as easy as possible. There are other systems that we're also pulling in data from. For example, Dalux is a key one, ProjectWise is another, ProjectWise is a third. We're also pulling in data from, we can also interact with systems like Power Automate, for instance, and Power BI, and the likes thereof. One other area that we've, that especially a lot of our scale-up customers have like really started using and engaging with is we previously focused on syncing data from other systems, but increasingly we have many of you who are collaborating with each other, and you're asking, can I actually sync data from that hub from X party's hub to my hub, and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, we've now added the ability to sync Morta data itself, and that then allows you to merge these data sets and allows you to combine it together and allows you to aggregate it and derive insight from it. The last thing that I just wanted to very quickly touch on is another area we've done a lot of work in this year is we've been improving as more and more of you are joining us on this journey. We've started investing more in making it as easy as possible for you to get on the platform. So templates obviously was a really key one, and integrations is another. But before, we used to completely rely on being on calls with all of you, which is something we really value. But we know increasingly you need video libraries and help desk material that's accessible at any point that you need. So as a result, we've invested in our help desk itself. But earlier this year, and as part of the build up for the hackathon, we launched an academy. And within the academy, you'll see a range of things. So you'll see some of the concepts that we're after, like information as mortar, for example, which is a variation of the talk that I gave just now. We're starting to go into concepts like behind databases, for example, and how you can build databases, because we think that's quite important. But then we're starting to also go into various challenges and various areas. So for example, from an information management perspective, what are the types of things that people should be doing? And we're increasingly focusing on building out use case based help desk material. So for example, if I'm getting started on an information delivery plan, what are the steps that I need to do in order to get that done? And you can see this as a model for what we'll be building on next year. So we'll only be adding more and more to this, because we want to make it as easy as possible for you to find the information that you need about Morta when you need it. The other key thing here is increasingly we'll be asking many of you as community members to share some of your insights within this academy. So for example, if you're someone who's scaled information delivery planning, we'd love to have you talk about that so that people can learn from the nitty-gritty challenges that you would have had. Obviously, the community day itself is a key way with which we try to unlock that. Right? So the whole point of today is for us to learn from each other and for us to gain inspiration from each other. So when we set up the day, we take into consideration two things. The first is who and what we learn from every single person we're working with within the community, first and foremost. But sometimes we see certain things that we've just not necessarily thought of, or not necessarily thought of in that way. And my bar is always, did I learn something from that conversation that I was having with one of the community members? So in every single one of the talks you'll see today, it's an example of that. It's an example of a group of people that has gotten together to build something on the platform, and that we genuinely think have innovated and have opened our eyes to something that we hadn't necessarily thought of. And then in turn, if that's the case, we hope that many of you will also gain inspiration from what you'd see. So that's our bar, like generally speaking. We want it to be a day where we all learn and we get inspired from each other. It is not intended to be case studies. Like, it is not, sometimes it will be that, but that isn't our goal. Our goal is most of the people here will be existing Morta community members. You're already buying Morta, and you're already paying us for licenses and so on and so forth. We want you to gain inspiration from all of this, and we want you to learn from each other, because that vision that I outlined earlier is big. No one company can unlock it on its own. We can't do it on its own. We don't think any of the companies that we're working with can do it on its own. We think we all need to collectively work together as a community to learn from each other in order for us to really get to a world where we truly use information as mortar and we truly unlock the visibility that this industry needs.